My name is Rosemary Lee, a Sergeant of Police in the Jamaica Constabulary Force. And I'm here just to let you know that there's absolutely no excuse for abuse. For too long, our men and women suffer the indignity of mental and physical abuse in silence. It's time to stop. Now is the time. Speak up. Speak out and be counted among those who wants to see a positive change. If you know of a situation or someone who is being abused, don't turn a blind eye. If it's you, gain that courage to get help. You could be saving your own life. And just remember, there is no excuse for abuse. Feel free to call the police. Call the Bureau of Gender Affairs in Jamaica on the numbers listed. Sergeant Lee said that.
No excuse for abuse.
Absolutely loving this, folks. Here we go. We're off to a good start. My name is Patria K. Charles, and I'm going to be your moderator this evening. And I know I like the expression that I saw a while ago, the power talk, because we're going to have a powerful conversation, a practical conversation, and at the end of it all, we're actually going to take action. I say a very good evening to the folks who are tuned in right now. COVID cannot stop this. So even though we may not be able to gather together, we certainly are gathered in spirit for a cause that is crucial. Wherever you may be in the world, wherever you may be logged in right now, because we know that we have folks that are tuned in online, whether you are on the social media pages of the JIS, we welcome you, whether or not you are currently on the social media pages of the UNDP, we welcome you. We're having this conversation. My name is Patria K. Charles, like I told you, and today is a very appropriate day for us to have this conversation. It's the 25th of November, and it actually is commemorated internationally as the Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And we're having this talk right here in Jamaica. It's the start of 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. And you heard mention the police officer in the video talk about the fact that, yes, it's women, but it's also men. And it's something that we don't talk about enough, something that we don't talk about often. And it's something that we also need to put on the table here in this conversation today, that gender-based violence is gender-based. It's men and women, and we need to talk about all of it. So like I said, I have to say a very special big ups to everybody who is watching on the GIS YouTube page or the GIS Facebook page. Special hello also to the folks who are looking on the UNDP YouTube page, on their Twitter page, and also on their Facebook page. And I want everybody to know that this is not a one-way talk, it's a conversation. You can actually join in the conversation. We have two hashtags that we're using today. The first of those hashtags is hashtag 16 days. That's hashtag 16 days for the 16 days of activism against violence, gender-based violence. And then the second hashtag is hashtag spotlight end violence. That's hashtag spotlight end violence. Make sure that you use it on your Facebook, on your Twitter. If you are using Instagram for whatever reason, make sure that we get the conversation going. And also feel free to ask the questions that you may have. Already I start liking the vibe in the chat section. I see people already saying hello and getting energized. Feel free to use the chat section, because throughout this discussion, we're going to be able to share some of your comments, some of your questions, and get responses from our panelists. So get involved for sure. So let me tell you a little bit about the Spotlight Initiative. Now, they're on a mission, and that mission is really to help women and girls primarily realize the full potential that exists in violence-free, gender-responsive, inclusive ways. And so today we're going to look specifically at the legislation. We're looking specifically at the laws that are there to protect folks who are subject to gender-based violence. And we're talking about some of those reforms that have happened, some of those reforms that need to happen. And we're not just hearing from the legislators, but we're hearing today from a wide array of folks who have a say in the matter. We're talking to somebody who has been a victim of gender-based violence, has lived to tell the tale, and she's going to be sharing her story. We're going to be talking to folks. One of the panelists today is actually one of the experts that's looking at the legislation. We have members of parliament who are also going to be addressing us today because they write the laws, and we also have members of the police force who are going to be a part of the discussion, and you, because we have to get to the meat of the matter. So we also today are going to be having this roundtable and showing you how collectively we can work together, because in Jamaica, what we say, one hand can't clap, one hand cannot clap. And collectively, we're going to have this discussion. It's going to be, like I said, it's going to be powerful, it's going to be practical, and we're going to take action at the end of it. I really have to, at this point, welcome someone very special who's going to be addressing us in this forum. I know today was a very, very busy day for her. It continues to be a very, very busy day for her. And I actually have to go to my paper and read some of her accomplishments because the list is long, and rightfully so, we give her her reward as she's here. She's the Honorable Olivia Babsy Grange, and she has actually served as a member of parliament for the constituency of Central St. Catherine for quite some time, since 1997. And she's currently the longest serving woman MP in the House of Representatives. She was appointed the Minister of Culture, Gender and Entertainment and Sport, and that happened in March of 2016. And she has this very impressive resume, and her interests and her advocacy is in a lot of areas. We're talking about arts and culture. We're talking about the creative industries. We're talking about entertainment, media, and arts. She has lent her voice to gender affairs, to heritage, to sports, to national commemorative events. And she's also written about religious and faith-based organizations, and the list just goes on and on. Now, previously, she served in the cabinet somewhere between 2007 and 2011 as the minister with responsibility for information, youth, sports, and culture, and also women and gender affairs, entertainment, community development, and special projects. You know that you're back broad when you have to take on all of those responsibilities, and you do it with grace and excellence. So during the tenure, she actually led the development of the national policy for gender equality and youth entrepreneurship, as well as the national sports policy of Jamaica. It's a long list of accomplishments, and she's going to share with us today her own perspective. Please make welcome Minister Olivia Babsy Grange.
Okay. All right, so I'm right up front. Okay, so I just want to greet my colleagues. I am not sure if Minister Terry Long is on us yet, but I just want to greet.
I'm on HM.
Oh, okay. All right, so Alanda, how are you doing? Very good. So I just want to greet all my colleagues and to thank the UNDP and all the UN partners for inviting me to make a presentation today. So we have come in this forum to denounce yet again what I consider to be a major evil in our world today, and that is violence against women and girls. It is an ever-present danger that erodes safety and justice for all. And therefore, we must all pledge to do what is necessary to create safer spaces for women and girls as we continue to build a Jamaica that will last, a prosperous Jamaica where women and men live together in peace, a Jamaica where women and men live as equals, a Jamaica where we work together to build our country, Jamaica land we love. We cannot realize our dream for Jamaica without addressing the high levels of violence in our country, generally, and in particular against our women and our girls. Therefore, today, on this International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, I encourage you to join me in making a simple pledge. Let's pledge to treat each woman and girl in the same way as we would wish for our grandmothers, our mothers, our sisters, and our daughters to be treated. If we treated each other as we should, as we would wish to be treated by others, I believe we would not have the major challenge that we have in Jamaica and across the world with violence against women and girls. It is high time that we eliminate what the UN Women has called this shadow pandemic of domestic violence. Domestic violence cannot and must not be countenanced. We continue to say, and we will never tire of saying it, that there is no excuse for abuse. The mere fact that this forum is being branded the virtual roundtable is testament to our current reality. The COVID-19 has pushed us to reimagine how we function as a society. We have had to socially distance ourselves among a raft of measures to keep us safe. But the stay-at-home measures that were intended to engender safety and health had the unfortunate side effect of having women and our children locked up with their abusers, sometimes without access to family or friends or an opportunity to call for help. In ways, COVID has created a perfect prison, an inescapable battle zone for many women, not only in Jamaica, but in every country of the world. UN Women, in their recent statistics, reported that prior to the onset of the pandemic, approximately 243 million women and girls were victims of domestic violence. Consequent on the pandemic, they report that the numbers have increased. Some of the factors for this increase include security, health, and money worries, cramped living conditions, isolation with abusers, movement restrictions, and deserted public spaces. As I speak, the life of a woman and those of her children are at stake in our country. Right now, women and girls are reflecting on near-death experiences at the hands of abusers. We know from the Women's Health Survey that 1 in every 4 women in Jamaica has been either slapped, beaten with fists, pushed, kicked, attacked with a weapon, or threatened with a weapon by her male partner. That 1/4 of women in Jamaica have been sexually abused by men who are not their intimate partners. That the majority of men who sexually abused women were friends and acquaintances. That 1 out of every 5 women reported being sexually abused before reaching age 18 years, and the person who did it was a family member or a friend. None of us can be satisfied with this situation. It is time to end the numerous heartless, callous, horrific, and brutal attacks against our women. The violence can end, my colleagues. It must end. And if we work together, we will end it. We must continue our advocacy. We must be deliberate, militant, and focused. So my government is serious about eliminating the violence. It requires all of working together, all of us working together to end the violence. And that is why we have been quite deliberate about taking a whole of government approach with the various arms of government actively engaged in our effort to tackle gender-based violence. We continue to pursue a raft of legislation, various programs and initiatives towards eliminating the violence. So it is clear that we must update the legislation to really reflect the nuances involved in domestic violence, as well as ensuring that victims have greater protection. The approved amendments have already been through 2 rounds of review between my ministry and the Office of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel. The Attorney General's Chamber is in the process of reviewing the amendments to the Domestic Violence Act as is customary to ensure that the provisions do not contradict any existing law or offend the Constitution. And at the completion of this review, we will be able to table the amendments in Parliament. And those amendments we expect to table early in the new year, sometime in January. The amendments signify my government's commitment and my personal commitment to protect our society, but more specifically, our women and girls from abuse in domestic situations, whether it be sexual, psychological, financial, emotional, verbal, and economic. In the amendments, we also propose an expansion of the categories of persons allowed to apply for protection orders, as well as an expansion of prohibited behavior patterns. Now, listen to this. This particular amendment, I believe, is critical as it will ensure that victims will no longer be restricted to establishing a pattern of abuse before redress can be sought before court. Instead, the law will give protection against the behavior patterns of an abuser, against the threatening or harassing behavior of people connected to an abuser. And the law will also have provisions for the confiscation of a firearm from an abuser when used in a threatening manner. These amendments signal our intention to do more to eliminate violence against women and girls. And I can tell you that many, many more far-reaching changes are yet to come. Patria, I'm not sure how much more time I have, but I have a little bit more to say that the collaboration between the JCF and the Bureau of Gender Affairs is extremely important in this regard. And through the Bureau of Gender Affairs, which is a principal department tasked with working closely with stakeholders in the fight against domestic violence, we work very, very closely with the JCF. And the Bureau handed over 6 domestic violence intervention centers under the EU-UN Spotlight Initiative to the JCF. And this is a landmark achievement as it signals how serious we are in breaking down the walls of domestic violence. I will fast forward and mention the fact that the establishment of the national shelters has always been a strategic priority for the ministry. Our first shelter was open, and in fact, it was filled to capacity at one point. And since its establishment, women who we have brought in, we have had 2 babies born in the shelter, and the program is going very well. And by the end of the year, a second shelter will be opened. So, in concluding, I want to indicate that violence against women is not a trivial man and woman story. It is a horrendous crime from which many women do not survive. And for too long, too many of us have turned a blind eye to violence against women, especially domestic violence. And so we speak of it in hushed tones, we put a stigma on victims, and we rarely, if ever, mention the perpetrators. So tonight at 8 p.m., I invite everyone, and this is not a commercial, Patria. I just want to indicate here for our listeners and viewers that they should go to PBCJ at 8 o'clock, or they could go to the ministry's Facebook page or my Facebook page, and we will hear from a courageous woman who has survived domestic violence and has shared her story in the hope that it can help another woman somewhere. Her name is Beverly Gordon, and she has come out to indicate to the world that she's a survivor and to say what her experiences were. And so to each of us who can do something to help a woman who is suffering, I invite you and implore you to do so. We can end the violence, and we all have a responsibility to end the violence. Thank you so much. And thanks to my colleagues who share the stage with me today. Blessings.
You. Thank you so very much, Minister. I really do appreciate the sharing a while ago. And I mean, those amendments that are coming are a signal that domestic violence is something that as a country we take seriously. I certainly welcome the opening of that second shelter. I remember not too long ago, there was a conversation, a very heated conversation, lots of threads that were happening on Twitter around when a woman is being abused. And we talk about the behavior of an abuser isolating you from your friends and family. So when you're in that place of isolation, you're being abused and you want to run, where do you run to? And we just didn't come up with enough answers that as a country we had provided enough spaces for women to run to. And so it's a welcome news that you shared today that we're going to be able to open that second shelter in short order. So thank you for sharing with us today. Folks, I want to share just a little bit of information around the Spotlight Initiative, some more as you get to know more about it. So it's actually a global initiative and it's a multi-year partnership. Quite a lot of hands on deck, but specifically the European Union, they put their money where their mouth is, and also the United Nations, they've come together for the Spotlight Initiative. And the intention, like I shared with you a little bit earlier on, is to eliminate every single form of violence against women and girls, and to have those folks, have us as women and girls feel supported, feel empowered, and to bring the folks to the table who have the power to make change. It is not a cheap venture. In fact, here in Jamaica, it's the biggest investment in the Caribbean in the initiative. Some 8 million euros has been spent on the initiative, but it is money well spent and worth spending because our women and our girls are worth it. Men, women, children, girls, for none of us is abuse okay. And so all hands have come on deck, come together, and the initiative is actually going to be ensuring that we do put a stop, we end that violence. And I remind you to join in the conversation. It's happening on social media right now. Hashtag it is 16 days. And you can also use the hashtag Spotlight End Violence. I moved from one minister to another, from a woman to a man, because we talk about balance, and we're going to be talking about gender-based violence, this time from a male minister's perspective. I welcome somebody who I went to high school with, full disclosure. He, on the 15th of September 2020, he actually was appointed the Minister of State in the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport. He is Minister Alanda Terrilong, and it's actually his second appointment as the Minister of State in that ministry. Before, he actually served in the Ministry of Education, correct? The Education, Youth and Information. He had direct portfolio responsibilities there for youth and information. He's actually a graduate, I told you, of Campion College, really strong, but we're purple today. And he's also a graduate of the University of the West Indies, where he studied law. He was admitted to the bar after successfully completing his legal education at Norman Manley. And something lots of people perhaps don't know is that he's a Shivning scholar. What many will know is that he's always lent his voice to end domestic violence, and he'll do so today. Please make the minister welcome.
Thank you so much, Patria, and good afternoon to Minister Grange. Good afternoon to our colleagues from the European Union, from the United Nations generally, and of course, more specifically from the Spotlight Initiative. And of course, to you, our wonderful, my fellow champion guardian after the ceremonies. And of course, to my fellow panelists, one and all. I think I saw Tanya Chambers as well, who I went to law school with on the panel and stuff. I haven't seen her in a while, so it's good to see her listed on the panel. And to our viewers, near and far, wherever you are, welcome. So this initiative is so important. And I'm literally in it's a Thursday, just to give a bit of background. And Thursday is my constituency day, and we just left the community of Southborough with members from the Sport Development Foundation because we're going to be doing a new multi-purpose court. And, we had the ladies out there because, we want them to be able to play their netball and everything else. And I said, okay, I have to get to my office by 4 o'clock now. So I'm now in my constituent office, and I literally told them that, listen, I can't get to them until after 6 if they can wait, because we do have this panel discussion going on. But for me, it's so important because ending violence against women, it's not just the one day, which is November 25th, when we highlight, and we try to make the issue, bring more awareness to the issue of gender-based violence, in particular as violence against our women and girls, because we do accept that our men and boys are also the victim of violence, and including gender-based violence as well. But today we focus on our women and girls. But it really is something that we champion every single day to end this violence. And we had a seminar this morning put on by the Bureau of Gender Affairs. And I indicated, when I looked in the room of about 100 persons, we had about maybe 10 men. And Patria, what I want persons within the scope of gender relations to understand is that any discussion that embarks on eliminating violence against women and girls, it must include more men at the table. We have to include more men at the table because the perpetrators of violence against men against women and girls are men. And that cultural change, that change in behavior, it must come from our men. It is how we raise them as boys. It is how we interact with them as youth. And it is how they interact amongst themselves and with our female counterparts as young men and adults, grown big men, that will make the difference. In Parliament, I spoke many years ago about toxic masculinity, and I found it an indictment on our country when some of my fellow parliamentarians thought it necessary to snicker and also to go on political platforms and criticize it, whilst failing to recognize that we do have a problem in Jamaica. We have a culture, and when we speak of toxic masculinity, Patria, we're not trying to say that a man must not be a man. We want our men to be men and want to be manly men, but being a manly man or being a true man does not mean that you can resort to violence against a woman. It does not mean that you own your woman. She's not property. It doesn't mean that you can disrespect her and hit her, and it doesn't mean, and not even when you're married to her. And even when you have children with her, it doesn't mean that you can rape her. Her body is autonomous of you and the relationship. Her sense of being, her very dignity, her humanity must be respected. And when we speak of toxic masculinity, we want to say, put on those traits that end up in violence, whether it's physical violence or the verbal abuse of our women, because that is what we have a problem with. That is what sees 1 in 4 of our mothers and sisters and daughters suffering at the hands of some, the Prime Minister used a term in Parliament one day when he spoke about waste man, of some of these waste men, because they're not real men, because real men know how to walk away from a violent situation, how to diffuse a situation. And so as we focus on raising awareness this November 25th, what I want us to do also is to focus on that cultural change, which must happen in the minds of our men and our boys. Because unless and until that happens, I'm very proud of the work that we have done at the ministry level. Building out the shelters and providing that escape for women. And Patria, I can tell you, one Saturday I was in one of the communities that I represent, and I saw a mother with three children, and she had bags and she's running, and I said, hold on, stop, what happened? I said, Terrell, I can't talk. And she was literally in flight from a situation in her home. And I said, no, hold on. And we took her over to a particular school that was nearby. And I called Minister Grange and I said, Minister, this is what's happening now and everything. How can we best assist her? And she called Dr. Tamika Peart. And when I tell you that in no time, someone from one of the shelters came in a van, They also came with a psychologist, because this is the work, this is the extent of the work that we're providing at the ministry. It's not just taking them into a shelter. It is also providing that socio-psychological evaluation to say, okay, well, this is what's happening, and we need to start, of course, the healing process. So we've taken it afar. We recognizing the socio-psychological factors that come with violence as well. And we were able to place her in one of the shelters with the children, and she's now learning a skill as well. I also want, as we speak about eliminating violence against women, I want to make a special appeal also to our women. I do understand and appreciate the majority of our tertiary graduates are now women, over more than 70%. And I want to make a special appeal to the remaining 30%, or more women. Continue to empower yourselves. Continue to empower your mind and empower your girls, and continue to empower your young men as well. Because we live in a society where the vast majority of single parent households are run by women. And I want our women to empower their sons to understand that what makes you a man is recognizing your responsibilities to your families and to the women in your lives, and that you must respect them, you must care for them, you must treat them the very same way you would want to see your mother and your daughter treated at all times. So that cultural change must start within the home as well. And I also want our young girls to understand the value of an education, develop empowering themselves, because statistically we find that some women who stay within the domestic violence out of shame and fear, there is also that financial element as well, because there's nowhere to go. Who is going to take care of me? Who's going to take care of the children? What am I going to do as well? So there is that aspect in terms of empowerment. He lifts his hand, you tell him to come out of your house. So when I speak to our young girls in primary school and high school, I tell them, tell you something. You will make sure, say, you push your own door key. So if him take him one day and him lift up a man, you run him out of your house, put him out of your car, you know. And so I want us all to recognize that within the family context, the importance of empowering our young girls and our young boys as well. And within the general relationship aspect, for our men to understand that, listen, you can't rape your wife. You can't rape your woman. You don't own her. You can't disrespect her. You know, I mean, you open the newspaper again, and ever so often there's another case of a woman tried to leave a man, and he hunts her down and he kills her. She doesn't belong to you, my brother. If she wants to leave, let her go. What you putting your hands on her for? You know, she's not property that you must own. But that's the cultural aspect that we need to talk about. And more men need to join the discussion so that we can indicate to the next generation of young kings that, Papa, that subcultural notion that they think this will make you a man, it don't make you a man. It make you a waste and along the journey. So that's my opening contribution, Patria.
And I'm loving it. It's the kind of passion that I want to see right across the board from all of us, because lots of us, pity is the thing that we feel. You hear the stories, or you may see something and you feel pity and you don't take action. And that's the point, that we're going to have to turn things around, where we move beyond pity and passion and we get to a place of action. So I love the fact that you continue to walk and spread the message of ending the domestic violence, but also the empowerment. I mean, today's theme is a lot around what you spoke about, this whole idea of reclaiming your power, both women reclaiming their power, but also men, in the sense where reclaim your power to think before you act. Reclaim your power of restraint, your power to use your words instead of your hands. And so the power definition is something that we're going to have to change as we move forward. And the conversation continues. Thank you so much, Minister. And I make way from you, I actually segue to the panel discussion, the roundtable discussion, because I want to make sure that all of our panelists turn their mics on and they get ready. Turn your mics on, turn your video on, and you get ready to really share in some enriching conversation. I want to let everybody know who we're going to be having in the roundtable session. So as you would have met two of our panelists before, the Minister Olivia Babsy Grange and also Minister Terry Long joining them, we're going to be having the Principal Director of Gender Affairs in the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport, Sharon Coburn Robinson, is going to be joining us. We also have Inspector Jacqueline Dillon of the Jamaica Constabulary Force. Joining them, we also have the colleague that you spoke of, Tanya Chambers. She's actually the Spotlight Initiative legal consultant. So she's really been digging into the laws and looking at what needs to change, what has changed, and we're going to be having discussions around that. And then also joining in the conversation, we're going to have Executive Director, the Acting Executive Director of Women's Inc. They see it every day firsthand. I think Joyce Hewitt deserves a cape. She's a superhero, she and the ladies that work at Women's Inc. So we welcome all of you to this discussion. I think we're going to start off the conversation now with Tanya Chambers, who at the heart of all of this, certainly today's discussion, is around the laws, is around what needs to change and what has changed in the laws. Now, Tanya actually is a legal and policy specialist. She's worked as a legal advisor in both public and private sectors, so the wealth of knowledge is very vast. And in the past, she's advised government departments and NGOs and international agencies on the application of law to a range of developmental issues, typically in the fields of child protection, of governance. She also speaks to disaster law and justice administration right here in Jamaica. She is a governance expert and a legislative policy strategist. And she actually has included in her body of work policies under the Child Care and Protection Act, the Education Act, and we're going to be hearing from her now as she has delved into the specific acts around gender-based violence. Please welcome.
Good afternoon. Thanks for that great welcome.
Sure.
Good afternoon, Honorable Ministers Grange and Terrelong. Good afternoon to the EU and UN teams, to my other panelists, and to everyone here in the session. Can you confirm if you're seeing my screen, please?
We're seeing it, Tanya.
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay. So just to jump in, I wanted to talk about the Domestic Violence Act. I will delve a little bit into some of the other laws that we have on the books, but I really wanted to look at it from the survivor's perspective and what survivors often need in terms of a survivor-centered approach to law. Now, a survivor-centered approach to law, what does that entail? This speaks to laws that give the survivor a choice, that address the survivor's security and health needs, and not just treats them as a cog in a criminal justice wheel. This talks about recognizing different types of violence and therefore providing different types of legal strategies, both civil law strategies and criminal law strategies to deal with the different issues that a survivor may have. You're also talking about an approach to law that addresses a wide range of family needs and practical needs that come up in the context of domestic violence, not only related to the survivor, but children of the family. And you're talking about a legislative framework that facilitates coordinated support services from all of the government entities that provide any kind of service or intervention to a survivor. So these are some of the factors that we're going to look at when we look at the effectiveness of the Domestic Violence Act. And as the minister started off, Minister Grange started off talking about the upcoming or the pending reforms to the Domestic Violence Act. So many of these things have already been placed on the table, both in policy discussions as well as even in some of the parliamentary discussions that have gone on around gender-based violence laws. But of course, it's very important for us to keep the reform agenda at the forefront of all of our discussions. And so that's what we're gonna talk about today. The Domestic Violence Act, of course, as you'll all know, it's really a civil law applied in the family court. It's not predominantly a criminal legislation. And there are no criminal sanctions in the law directly for violence. The sanctions that you'll find in the law would be for disobeying an order issued by the court under the law, but there's no direct penalty for a criminal, an act of violence under the law. The DVA addresses domestic violence as physical and emotional violence and speaks to a range of different acts, including threats of violence and even certain types of harassment. And it applies to interpersonal relationships within the household setting. So people often think of it in relation to marriage or common law unions, but it does apply to children of the household as well. So the act can be used on behalf of children in a household and not just in terms of the intimate relationships between two partners in a marriage or a common law union. And the focus, of course, of the law, the civil remedies that we refer to really are about keeping the abuser away from the abused. So the fact that the law is not in and of itself criminal does not necessarily mean that persons who are victimized in a domestic violence setting don't have access to the criminal legal framework to support their abuse. That is found under a range of other laws. So of course we have sexual offenses under the Sex Offences Act, the regular offenses in terms of assault and battery or offenses related to somebody injuring another person. Those you'll find under the Offenses Against the Person Act, everything up to attempted murder, manslaughter, murder, that's all there. We have other types of laws that touch on various issues. So we've had cases in Jamaica where somebody used the internet to spread pornographic images of another person coming out of a domestic violence dispute. And that was prosecuted under the Cyber Crimes Act. There are offenses in relation to firearms, so firearms holders. We have trafficking in persons and a number of child care and protection laws. So there is a network of legislation that's relatively robust. But then we come to the Domestic Violence Act and we find that sometimes there's a disconnect in the minds of persons when you think of these laws as touching on real violence, but the Domestic Violence Act, because it's a family court act, people see it as somehow being a lesser creature, and therefore domestic violence itself is seen as not quite the same as other types of crime. It doesn't mean that the orders under the Domestic Violence Act are not valued. We do have three very important orders. The protection order keeps the perpetrator from coming near to the abused person. The occupation order can remove the perpetrator from a home even if they are legally entitled to being in that house. So they can remove the perpetrator even from their own home for a period of time. And of course, there are maintenance orders that can be used, particularly when it comes to maintaining children of the home. But having said that, as I said before, the fact that these are considered to be family law issues sometimes creates the notion in the minds of community members and even sometimes members of the police force that what you're dealing with is something a little bit less than a real crime or a real type of violence, and somehow is a little bit more permissible, both from a social and legal perspective. So part of the recommendations for change is to really adjust that issue in terms of how we normalize domestic violence, both from a social perspective as well as from a legal perspective. Let's look at different factors of the law and the different areas for reform that have been raised by civil society members, by other persons who utilize the law as frontline workers, etc. So the first thing that we're looking at is the types of violence recognized by the DVA. Unfortunately, the current law does not have a definition of domestic violence, nor does it recognize all types of abuse. So it speaks of physical issues and some emotional issues, harassment, etc. but it doesn't necessarily cover all types of violence. If we look in Caribbean legislation, we see some wider definitions that touch on issues that Minister Terry Long raised, issues of emotional and financial abuse, and issues of sexual violence. We're seeing laws in Trinidad and Tobago and a couple other jurisdictions going a little bit further than we did when we last updated our law, and including other types of violence. That's one major consideration. Recognizing that some people affected by domestic violence are not even a couple still, but they may have a child in common. And because they have a child in common, there might be a threat of violence that remains within the context of that relationship. And strengthen interventions for children in the home. We recognize that children are affected by domestic violence when not affected directly by the violence. The impact on them psychologically is such that we want to make sure that what is in the law is strengthened. The other area that we're going to look at is the issue of criminal remedies under the law. Now, as we mentioned, the law does have very useful civil remedies. It can keep the abuser away from the abuse. It can move the abuser out of the home if necessary. But the fact is, the absence of criminal penalties under the law can lead to the notion that domestic violence is not really a crime. It's not a serious issue. In terms of room for reform, the call has been made for including actual criminal penalties within the law itself, or creating a stronger linkage between the Domestic Violence Act and the other types of legislation that I would have mentioned before, so that it sends a very clear signal within our communities, within our families, within our legislative or criminal law system, that domestic violence is violence and it is prohibited. Increasing the penalty for breach of a domestic order is another way to help to shore up the notion of the seriousness of the law, and some recommendations have been made along those lines as well. Now, upholding the survivor's right to choose is very critical, because although we do want criminal penalties under the law, we don't want a situation where a survivor is automatically forced to trigger those penalties. We want to honor and respect the survivor's independence and sense of self-determination. In other words, their responsibility to determine their own future and become empowered through the process of assisting them in terms of a response to domestic violence. So in terms of the current content of the law, it's really the survivor who bears the weight of initiating and advancing the process. There is some provision for other persons being able to initiate the process on behalf of the survivor. But truthfully, there is a conception on the ground that the survivor has to be the one who files a police report, and that everything else weighs on that. It's not really supported by the content of the Domestic Violence Act, but that is something that persons have reported over and over again. So what are the reforms that we're recommending? Expanding the number of persons who can apply on behalf of a victim. The Bureau of Gender Affairs, for example, in the draft bill, has been identified as a relevant party, particularly based on the shelter that's been implemented. And there are other relevant parties recommended as well. Also, expanding the options available to the court when the survivor is not able to proceed. So when a survivor wants to pull back, is that initiative abandoned? Well, how about rehabilitation orders for the abuser? If the survivor wants to abandon the process, can the court, based on the circumstances, continue to issue an order specifically to the abuser to say, no, you still have to go through a rehabilitation process. You still have to go and check in a specific batterer targeted course of activities, so that we don't keep perpetuating and repeating cycles of violence. So those options of the court would take some of the weight or the burden off of a survivor, but still allow the law to maintain a certain level of order in circumstances in which the survivor opts out of a legal process. Now, how effectively does the Act address the survivor's health and security needs? That's something that we want to look at as well. Now, if we're dealing only with a criminal law-based issue, the survivor's needs really are not going to be at the forefront of the process. So this is one way in which the flexibility of a civil law system really acts in the favor of a survivor. So domestic violence orders can be used in this kind of way to help the survivor create that distance between themselves and the abused, but there's room for improvement. Some of the things that we've seen in other legislation, mandatory police response to domestic violence reporting. It doesn't mean that a criminal justice process is mandatory, but the police must take a report, they must follow up, they must show up, and they must provide some kind of referral advice to the survivor. Some other things that we've seen, I think the Minister Grange made reference to the issue of recalling firearms, a very important one as well. A risk assessment before a domestic violence order expires, very important. The orders under the Act don't last forever, and ensuring that before they automatically expire, there's some kind of risk assessment to see if a threat is still pending. Victim compensation, victim restitution, and victim redress are all critical and can help a survivor cover their medical, mental health, and other costs. And of course, ensuring that there are options within the law for the court to refer the survivor themselves to independent psychological support, psychosocial support at the cost to the abuser. So those are some ways in which the law can be strengthened to focus a little bit more on the survivor's needs. We do see some reference to family and practical needs in terms of the maintenance orders being made, but we can also touch on custody orders being available within the context of the same matter being before the family court. And of course, supervised visitation orders is not something that we currently have under our current system, but we're advocating for. Now, at the heart of this has to be a joined up approach on the part of the government. And we talk about a survivor-centered continuum of care as something that the government entities have been working with the Spotlight Initiative to promote. So the things that we've been talking about, safe shelter, health interventions, the DVI centers that I know we're going to talk about a little bit more, strengthening the justice response, making sure that children are cared for and protected, and that the psychosocial support services are available, including the community NGO-based services that are often so critical to the survivor regaining their independence and their sense of a place in society. So to sum up, what are some of the things that we are promoting and calling for and asking persons to back up in all of your own spheres of influence? First of all, a clear and expansive definition of domestic violence must be in the law, and it must cover all forms of violence or harm, be they physical, emotional, financial, or sexual harm. A mandatory police response by trained police personnel, particularly through the DVI centers, criminal penalties to underscore the egregious nature of domestic violence, strengthening the protection for children in a violent home, making sure that every time there's a domestic violence matter before the court and a child is in the home, there's some kind of social inquiry reporting to check on that child. Battery rehabilitation programs and orders to back those up are really, really critical to end the cycle of violence, and ensuring that survivors have access to compensation, restitution, and their costs being covered in the process. And of course, strengthening the interagency coordination at both the national level as well as the parish level where things are happening on the ground, and ensuring that we have a continuum of care with all of the government entities working seamlessly together. So those are the proposals that have come out of the process. And that's the end of my presentation.
Absolutely fabulous, Tanya. I really love that you took that in-depth look at the law. And a lot of these things that you've put on the table are actionable. They're not beyond our ability to actually make those changes and get the kind of help to those who are subject to domestic violence know these are things that we can do. These are things that with resolve, we can actually get it done. So thank you so much for that. I'm about to say a statement that might cause shock and awe to some of the folks who are listening, but we talk about help for the abused. Does the abuser need help? Take a look at this video.
We have a gentleman who came to us in 2019, and he came and he said to us, I need help. I am an abuser.
We're going to get that one for you because often when we think about who needs the assistance, our minds immediately go to the woman who is involved, the girl, the child who is involved. But we're going to hear about a gentleman who is an abuser who reached out for help.
We have a gentleman who came to us in 2019, and he came and he said to us, I need help. I am an abuser. And I love this woman and I don't want her to leave me because she has 2 children for me. I want my family and I need help.
I recall dealing with a situation which the person, they were put onto a counselor. And I think it was a few days ago, they would have called and said, thank you very much. I really appreciate the effort.
The domestic violence intervention centers are free of cost. Once you call the police station, they will direct you to us.
And those domestic violence intervention centers are island-wide. They are there to support those who are victims of domestic violence. But as you just heard in that video, if you are an abuser and you want to stop the behavior, they're actually there to give you support as well. Simply reach out. I want to be able to just quickly, in the interest of time, take a few questions from the audience. I know folks are tuned in on social media. They're on Facebook, they're on Twitter, they're on YouTube, and I want to be able to field some of those questions very quickly. I see one immediately, and just letting folks know that they can actually share those questions in whichever social media space they're watching right now. And I'm going to be able to, if you're on the Zoom link, you can share your questions there as well. I'm going to be able to share it with our panelists. One question coming from Orville, who is asking, what of men who are abused? What solutions are there for them? I don't know if you want to take that one, Minister Grange. Whether it is Minister Grange or Minister Terry Long, perhaps you can take one of that question from Orville, who is asking, what about men who are getting abused? What solutions might there be for them?
Okay, well, I will, as a matter of fact, Mrs. Robinson, who heads the Bureau, is on the panel, and she will be addressing the fact that at the Bureau we have a unit that deals with matters affecting our men, because they are partners in this. Women have the greater experience in abuse, domestic violence abuse, and men are the larger perpetrators. However, we are introducing a program which will refocus the perpetrators and make them agents of change. And we are doing it as partners with the Ministry of Justice. And in addition to that, we have helplines for the men as well. So they can call if they have issues, or if they're in a situation that they're not sure how to deal with it, they can call and get counseling. So we are concerned about our men as well. We are about empowering our women and treating with the issues that affect our women, but not ignoring our men. But Mrs. Robinson will expand on that. So I hope this satisfies. Is it Orville?
It's Orville.
I'd ask the
I'm
question.
pretty sure it does comprehensive response there. You know, as we have this conversation today, there's a catchphrase that's been used very many times as we talk about violence, and you know, there's no excuse for abuse, and it's something that we can all embrace and log on to, whether it's abuse of men, abuse of women. There's just no excuse for abuse, and we say it, but Nadine Blair says it as well. Take a listen.
Patricia, I should make the point that the Women's Bureau started as a desk in the office of the Prime Minister, and then it became the Bureau of Women's Affairs.
Absolutely.
And eventually, I changed it to the Bureau of Gender Affairs. So we are interested in the welfare of our men as well as our women.
All encompassing. Just before we go to that video, no excuse for abuse, I have another question here from an attendee. The person says, I'm actually a survivor of domestic abuse, and the kinds of domestic abuse they went on to spell out: emotional, because oftentimes we think about just the physical side, you know, but this person says, yes, there was physical abuse, but there was also emotional abuse, and there was financial abuse. I have a new passion and a goal to be a guiding light for other women that have endured abuse. I would like to give back, helping another woman to champion through this. And my question is, how do I get involved and play a part in this movement? So if we're going to have the conversation and say, you know, government, this is the role that they play, and private sector, this is the role that they play, and NGOs, this is the role that they play, as an abused woman who wants to give back service to support another woman through this, how do they get involved?
I would like to suggest that Mrs. Robinson, she can just type in the numbers for the Bureau. We welcome all the support we can get in our fight to eliminate gender-based violence and to assist our survivors, to support them and to involve them in our efforts to eliminate. So Mrs. Robinson can type in the numbers and provide the numbers for the lady who wants, is it Melanie?
She didn't say her name, but we know that she's reached out to us. And I actually applaud her, because oftentimes, you know, you go through situations and you in your small corner feel like you don't have anything to give to somebody else. Certainly somebody who has lived this experience and lived through this experience can offer, you know, the kind of relating to somebody else who is going through this same thing. You're coming from a place, not this academic place or a place where you can't personally relate to what they're going through. And I think that connection is invaluable. So we celebrate you for coming through this, and we also celebrate you for stepping up and wanting to assist. The number there for the helpline, it is 553-0372. That's a female helpline. It's 553-0372. For the male helpline, it's 876-553-0387. That number can actually also be.
Patricia, if I could just highlight the fact that we provide subvention to, I think, about maybe 18 community organizations under a program we call COPE, C-O-P-E, Community Outreach, that this lady can also be a part of any of those community organizations that assist us on the ground to address issues affecting our women and our men.
Absolutely fantastic. Well, we talked about no excuse for abuse, and that holds true. Take a listen to Nadine.
No excuse for abuse.
My name is Nadine Blair, and I am joining the cry. We are tired of the abuse, and it must stop. Prodigal Son is singing, Eternal Father, bless our land. We pray it every day, and I'm joining the call. There is no excuse for abuse. If you are a woman and he's treating you right, giving you money and all of that, but he's hitting you at night, there is no excuse for abuse. If you're a man and she's cooking you food and she's making you feel nice or feel good, but she treats you bad, I'm telling you that's mad. There is no excuse for abuse. Look on the screen. There's a number you can call. Pick it up now, that phone in your hand. Cry out to the Lord. There is no excuse. There is no excuse for abuse. It stops now, and it starts with you.
No excuse for abuse.
It stops now and it starts with you. I have a lot of respect for the next panelist that I'm going to introduce. She is the acting executive director of a powerful organization called Woman Inc. And she herself, she is one advocate, a powerhouse of an advocate for women's rights, for human rights. And she's done work in Jamaica and in the Caribbean, right across the region for quite some time. And the work that she has done has been around attaining greater protection for our women and our girls, and really to promote the advancement of women. You know, we talked today about reclaiming your power. She is the powerhouse behind a lot of women reclaiming their power. She serves as a consultant now, a gender specialist for government agencies and NGOs. And that work actually happens not just here in Jamaica, but around the region. Please, I ask that you make her welcome, Doctor. She's actually Director, Executive Director, Joyce Hewitt. You deserve the cape and the doctorate. Welcome. Oh, she's having some difficulties, I gather, with her login. We're going to sort that out because I know she comes from a place of interacting on a regular basis with a lot of the ladies who, in fact, would benefit from the services of Woman Inc. So as we try and get her back, I'm actually going to move to another one of our panelists. And this one is actually the Principal Director of Gender Affairs. Minister Grange would have made mention of her. She is Sharon Coburn Robinson. And she actually has been involved in the development of social policy and social action research. She did her postgraduate studies in gender development. And she actually is going to be addressing us now. And I welcome you. Hi, Sharon.
Thank you so much, Patria K. I do have a PowerPoint that I wanted to bring up so we can have a discussion around it. But first, I need to greet my honorable minister, very hardworking. We consider our minister as the most hardworking minister ever. I also want to greet Minister Alanda Terrelong, or Minister of State, who was actually at a session that we had today, himself and Minister. I want to greet the EU, of course, you, our moderator, affable, always delightful and very, very flexible in terms of how you are able to engage a number of groups. I want to greet the EU partners, as well as our UN country team. Some of those persons were also in the session we had today to mark Idaho. I see my colleague, Inspector Jacqueline Dillon, who was also in our session, and other members of the panel who would be able to contribute, Mrs. Hewitt, of course. Our partner, we do have a public-private partnership agreement with Woman Inc. And I heard Minister mention COPE, the Community Outreach Through Partnership for Empowerment Initiative. Woman Inc. is the hugest partner on that. And through support from our budget, that comes from the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, we support Woman Inc. monthly to ensure that they are able to have that shelter supported as a part of our shelter strategy. And so I'm very happy that Mrs. Hewitt is a part of this conversation. So I wanted to talk a little bit quickly about the Bureau, because I'm not certain how many persons are aware of the Bureau and what it is that we do. So I wanted, first of all, to just say what we do as an organization, and then to talk a little bit about the NSA. So the Bureau is strategically positioned, as you know or not, within the ministry, as I just pointed out. That is the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport. And as far as we are concerned, the most dynamic ministry based on the number of areas that we support and that our minister has carried for. So we are the lead on the National Gender Machinery Program, And this is because we have a very robust national policy for gender equality, which was a brainchild of our minister and was approved in 2011. And on the strength of the approval of our policy, we were able to move from women's affairs to gender affairs so that we could more definitively fold in issues relating to men and boys in the conversation to be partners fighting for issues relating to women and girls. So consistent with cabinet decision on March 21, 2016, right on the heels of the return of Minister Grange, the Bureau of Gender Affairs was rebranded as the Bureau of Gender Affairs. So what are our roles and functions? Of course, we do have one space in Halfway Tree, but we are across Jamaica because we have officers that go across Jamaica. And now with the shelter strategy, we have, as Minister pointed out, one space, one national shelter owned and operated by the government of Jamaica with staff members who are on the budget of the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport. And we have a number of other spaces coming in. Minister mentioned the other two spaces that will join as regional shelters to complement the national shelter. So we do a number of things, but because of our national policy of gender equality, most of our work will be centered around policy development, monitoring and implementation. This is complemented by research and documentation because it is very important to ensure that while we roll out the national policy for gender equality and support other entities, ministries, departments, and agencies to make sure that they are also doing important gender work, that we ensure that the research is done, the data is collected, analyzed, and disaggregated, and disseminated so persons are able to also understand how it is that data shapes policy, programs, projects, and all other implementing stuff that you do in your space. We have a very robust community liaison unit, and that's because we need to have hands and feet across Jamaica. So some of the things that we do through the community liaison unit would be called first level intervention and referrals. So we are a part of a huge network of services. And that is why it's important for us to speak about the gender-based violence referral pathway, which we are being supported on through the EU partners under the Spotlight Initiative, which was launched on March 8 in 2020. Because we need to take information to the communities, we have what we call training and public education space, where we do significant amount of public education training and sensitization awareness raising around a number of issues. And of course, each time we have something new to talk about, for example, our new sexual harassment legislation, the Sexual Harassment Prevention and Protection Act, we would share this information with persons so they are kept abreast of what is new and what is required. The Bureau focuses, of course, at the policy level to ensure that gender analysis is integrated into all national policies, plans, programs, and projects. And this becomes very necessary because development initiatives, as we know or not, have a differential impact on women and men, boys and girls. What is the big overarching document that we use to frame our work around gender-based violence? Minister mentioned it earlier. It is a National Strategic Action Plan to eliminate gender-based violence in Jamaica. It's a 10-year plan. And so the span is 2017 to 2027. And this plan is what we consider a very ambitious plan, because what it aims to do is to have a very far-reaching approach to gender-based violence, integrating and having a multi-sectoral and structured approach to working with partners, key partners, to address issues and challenges relating to gender-based violence. It looks at three main groups of persons. So we have victims, which we can also put survivors there as we are working towards and moving towards a survivor-centered approach. It looks at perpetrators. And earlier our minister mentioned the fact that we now have this new program. It's called the Refocus Perpetrator Program, which allows for perpetrators, male and female perpetrators, to become a part of this new space that we are working through with the Ministry of Justice under the restorative arm of the Ministry of Justice, to talk with these persons who have been reported to the courts or referred to the courts as perpetrators, to do a very serious interrogation, to find out why it is that they have been considered as and put forward as a perpetrator, and how can we assist them to understand that being a perpetrator is not cool, and it is absolutely not tolerated at all, because in this space we have, as a government, a zero tolerance approach to all forms of violence, and in particular gender-based violence. And so the program is designed to assist these perpetrators to go through a series of programs and get some intervention with specialists who are very aware of how it is that they can treat with modalities relating to just how they can assist these persons with information, testimonials for those persons who have passed through it and are able to share with persons, and practical tools and strategies that they themselves can also assist with, and persons who have actually gone through training in other spaces, regional spaces, and on the global arena who can assist us. Then the third level would be the witnesses of acts of violence. And sometimes, regrettably, Petrio, the witness is a child. In our shelter that Minister spoke about earlier as well, we have families. We are very privileged to have units within the shelter that allow a woman who is fleeing from an act of violence or a very toxic relationship that's not safe and that's harmful and toxic, to take her small children with her. And so we've seen that children, sometimes those children witnessed the act of violence or were affected themselves. And so we have this opportunity to work with the CPFSA, the Office of the Children's Advocate, and other public entities and private spaces to secure help for these children. So the NSAP, which is the same big national strategic plan, it acknowledges the need to incorporate a socially inclusive, human rights centered, diverse approach to tackling this endemic problem. It is intended to facilitate strategic linkages. We can do nothing without linkages, and to ensure that there are synergies with policies that are in other spaces. So this document, which is our NSAP, will guide stakeholders in understanding and fulfilling their obligations, of course, under international instruments which preserve non-discrimination and protect against human rights violation. It will also serve as a guide to stakeholders to ensure that the treatment of victims/survivors is equitable and that no one feels left behind, no one feels violated. And this includes all persons who would be poised to be part of this space. Now, there are 5 strategic priority areas, and that's how we have broken out the support that is going to be given to these persons, whether you're a survivor or a victim, a witness of violence, a perpetrator, bystander, or just anyone who needs to have the support, and that includes all of us. The first one is prevention, and that's looking at how do we prevent the acts of violence? How do we stop it before it happens? The protection subcomponent looks at, okay, so now you are somebody who is a victim or a survivor, and you are in need of, or you're a perpetrator, you're a witness, and you need protection. What kicks in? Is it that they need to be in the shelter? Is it that they need psychosocial support and counseling? Is it that they need to be referred to one of our GBV service providers? So we would do the interrogation, the analysis, and determine what is required. The third strategic priority area is investigation, prosecution, and enforcement of court orders. Of course, you heard our minister talk about the Domestic Violence Act and the fact that we have already gotten some of the amendments through cabinet based on the fact that there was such an urgent need to do that. So in some cases, the protection order is violated. And I heard Tanya mention in her presentation, speaking about how it is that we can make sure that there is protection around victims and survivors, particularly in terms of protection orders. So I can tell you that the fine has been increased exponentially from $10,000 to $1 million. And we're not finished, because we're going to have, as our minister has already outlined, a special committee that will continue the conversation around the Domestic Violence Act, because that's the largest piece of legislation that treats with domestic violence, gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, and all of those bits and pieces that relate to women and girls, men and boys who would be affected in this way. The fourth strategic priority area is enforcement of victims' rights to compensation, reparation, and redress. And that we will do in partnership with Victim Services Division, in the Ministry of Justice, and all other parties that deal with these issues. The fifth and final protocols for coordination of NSAP and data management systems. So the one we mentioned earlier, which is a Refocus Perpetrator Program, that is also a part of the protocol. And there is another one that I mentioned today in our session. It's a complaints and response protocol, which outlines clearly the decisions that we will make, the steps that we will take, and how it is that we will organize and strategize around giving support to victims and survivors when they come forward with a complaint all the way to where it is resolved and they get justice. Now, there are some strategic outcomes for the NSAP. One is to prevent, naturally, gender-based violence. That's a large one. Another one is to improve the implementation of laws and to ensure that whatever services we are using and providing for victims, that it is responsive and that it matches the need based on what is required. We are also trying to ensure that we provide adequate support services for survivors and perpetrators of GBV. We want to ensure that we standardize protocols to make sure that there's effective data collection and capture of information that is important to inform policies, projects, and all of those. Another strategic objective or outcome, an outcome is to identify trends and patterns of gender-based violence through improved future planning, and programming, because we believe that once you collect data, you analyze data, then you should use it for something that's going to be going to the greater good. Another one is to formulate strategies aimed at the protection of vulnerable groups. Now, this is very important because we do have a lot of conversation around specific groups that are underserved and in communities that are not as well off or do not think that they are getting the sorts of attention that is deserved. And I did mention earlier that we have social workers who are trained and equipped to go to spaces that perhaps would not be able to come forward and ask for the service or to come forward and present their case. And so we have that option to go to them and that mandate as well to go to these persons. In this slide, it mentions persons with disabilities and other vulnerable groups. I must also say here that we have increased certainly our focus to persons with disabilities. I remember last year our minister pledged that she wanted to make a very large thrust that would include persons with disabilities. And so every time we have our sessions, we try to include persons with disabilities. So today we had a huge showing of persons based on the COVID-19 protocols. We had a huge showing of persons in our space. That's the public forum that we had who were blind, and we had persons who were deaf. And did they have fun? Yes, they did. We also have increased support in terms of just making sure that where we have our public education materials or IEC communication tools, that we have helped them to improve what it is that they can actually access. And so the material has been done in Braille and that we handed over to them so that they could actually be able to read the information that relates to how it is that domestic violence is defined, what is in place, how they can get support, what are the entities that they can consult, who are the entities they can consult for support, and what exactly it is that they require to do. And also for the hearing impaired or the deaf, we have increased also the support under COPE, the support that allows them to have more persons who do sign language. So when they come to sessions, they are included in the sessions and persons are there to sign for them so they can be an integral part of what is happening. We've also included them in our gender focal point network. Our gender focal point network essentially are persons who are in spaces, public spaces and private spaces, and they have an interest in gender and development. And so we have written to their heads of entities, permanent secretaries, and so on, and asked them to nominate a responsible, efficient person who will be able to come and speak on behalf of the entity, create an action plan that is nuanced to the principles of the National Policy for Gender Equality, as well as the NSAP or Strategic Action Plan. And now that we have our sexual harassment legislation, that would also be factoring as well. Once they have written their plan, they roll it out with our support and support from other entities. And we have the monitoring and evaluation all the time, as often as possible, so they can share what they're doing, share their challenges, share their success stories, and spark each other. I think that's it. So here I end my presentation. I think I'm going to be available to answer any questions that you might have later on. Thank you so much, Patria.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you. It's clear that a lot of thought and work is going into the protection of our women and girls. I particularly love that we've tailored so much for the disabled community. You know, the community, sometimes we've heard of domestic violence cases that happen in homes where there are persons living with disabilities and they don't have a voice. Too often they don't have a voice. And so I really am excited to hear about some of those things that we're going to be putting in place to ensure that particularly that demographic is catered to. Loving that. So I actually want to make way and introduce we've been talking a lot about this domestic violence intervention centers and the fact that they are island-wide and that they are there as a tool to support persons who are in fact escaping from domestic violence. And I want to share a little bit more about those centers with you. In fact, I won't do it. I think this video will. Take a look.
Your friends might tell you their view, how they feel that you are to deal with the situation, but then you might have different thoughts. We work along with how you are feeling, what you think is, we can do to assist you, and we work together. We don't give you our opinion, our personal views. We work along with your situation because it's not one size fits all. And we can direct you directly to where you want to go and to utilize resources that can help you in your situation.
Do not wait. The first sign, it's good to, but the first sign, it's best that you come out.
Absolutely. Just for folks who may not have known, there were in fact three domestic centers that would have existed, and through the help of this initiative, 3 became 4, became 5, is going to become 10. And somebody who is very integral in the actual manning of these centers. These are places where women who are in some of them situations where there is extreme violence. Some of these women are battered and they need assistance, and they need assistance right away, and they turn to police stations near them. And it is the police force that answers first and foremost. And the next panelist is actually the Inspector of Police. And she, along with some of the other members of the JCF, are working tirelessly to ensure that these centers are manned with compassion, are manned with police officers that are going to act with alacrity and with integrity to be able to ensure that these women who are coming from situations of abuse feel that they have a place of refuge. Please make welcome the member of the police force, who I'm going to introduce, and she's Inspector Jacqueline Dillon.
Good afternoon, Patricia. Good
Hello.
afternoon to all the other panelists and all the viewers. Thank you for having me, UNDP, to their Spotlight Initiative. I want to, before I begin, say a special thank you to you for helping us to get the additional centers that so badly needed in Jamaica. So we have the DVI care centers prior to the last 6 that came into being on September 24th. We had only 4, 1 at Constant Spring, 1 at Matilda's Corner, and 2 in St. Thomas. Those were the only areas that we had domestic violence intervention centers. And so on September 24th of this year, through the Spotlight Initiative, we are able to add an additional 6 centers. And they are located at 100 Man. Many people know 100 Man Police Station in Portmore, Hayes Police Station in Clarendon, Santa Cruz Police Station in St. Elizabeth, Negril in Westmoreland, Gale St. Mary, and Alexandra St. Anne. And those are the centers that we have for now. So what are the DVI care centers? The DVI care centers, and let me explain to you the acronym. It's domestic violence, I care. I care, I as an individual care. And the domestic violence intervention centers are operating under 5 principles. The first one is intervention, and the intervention may take varying forms. The second one is counseling. Then we have awareness. Then we look at response. How does the police respond to victims and perpetrators of domestic violence? Because we look at a holistic approach to it. So we look at both victims and abusers. We look at communities and its impact on communities. And we look at how do we build an awareness around domestic violence through the various community meetings, through the various churches, other community groups. Most critical of all the pillars, and I should have mentioned the first one about counseling, because for us, counseling is very important. As a matter of fact, in every instance where a victim comes to us, in order to be a survivor, you have to go through something and you have to tell yourself, I have moved beyond that and willing to move beyond that and get and change your own situation. So for us, counseling is integral to that process. And then we have empathy, which is the final pillar. And empathy talk about understanding a victim's situation, ensuring that my personal feeling does not get in the way of how we deal with victims of domestic violence as well as perpetrators of domestic violence. And so the Domestic Violence Intervention Centers offer services to all members of the public, whether male or female. We offer the service to all members of the public. We also offer the service to members of the JCF and their families as well, because we are aware that we have our own members who go through domestic violence matters. The Domestic Violence Intervention Center, based on what I said before, they are all located on the premises of police station compounds. And there's a reason for that. We're talking about safety and security. When persons who need help comes to us for help, they should feel safe. The centers gives you an avenue to allow your situation to be heard in a space that offers professional service, there's confidentiality, and there's sensitivity to the situation. And so all our center managers are trained in that regard. We unpick them, we train them. Our center managers are not just women, they are both women and men, because the center caters to both women and men. So the Domestic Violence Intervention Centers, at the stations where there are no centers, we encourage victims of domestic violence to report to the police, who will direct them to a center nearest them, or will direct them to another agency. And that is why our partnership, because we are law enforcement, we partner with other agencies. So the Bureau of Gender Affairs, Women Inc., Victim Support Unit, Restorative Justice Centers are all a part of our referral points. These are agencies that we refer matters to, because in truth and in fact, when you come to the Domestic Violence Intervention Center, we also have counselors who work with us at the centers. All centers are equipped with a counseling room. The police officers who are assigned the center managers at each center do not conduct counseling. What they do an assessment of the situation and refer the matter to counseling or to other external agencies, even the court. The Domestic Violence Intervention Centers do not at this time operate 24 hours, but the facility itself is not open 24 hours. However, the center managers can be reached during that 24 hours because all the centers are equipped with mobile phones. And if it is that you are not able to get a center, then you call the police station. So you have an option of calling the police station, you have an option of calling the center, and you can go directly to the center without even going to the police station first. You can go directly to the center. So the requirement is not for you to go to a police station and then you're referred to the center. No, you can either choose to go to a police station first, or you go to a domestic violence intervention center nearest you. But bear in mind that not all police stations at this time are equipped with a domestic violence center. And we work closely with the Bureau of Gender Affairs, because the Bureau of Gender Affairs is a national organization that deals with gender affairs matter. We also work closely with Women Inc. And so from time to time, we'll have cases that we have to refer to Women Inc., especially in instances where a woman may need counseling, or not necessarily counseling, but a woman may need to go to a shelter, or a woman may need to go to get a lawyer, because Women Inc. now has that ability to offer that kind of support that the JCF doesn't have. And so for us in the JCF, it's about partnership. We begin a process as first responders to the problem, but we also engage our other partners to ensure that at the end of the day, all victims, abusers who come to our attention, get the required help that they need to get. Because if we do not, and I support Minister Terlong in his statement, if we do not address abusers, then we would not have been effectively dealing with domestic violence and abuse, or gender-based violence and abuse out there. And so from our perspective at the Domestic Violence Intervention Center, that is how we deal with the matters that will come to us from time to time. And
absolutely fantastic work. Thank you so much, Inspector Dillon. I see the beaming pride oozing from your face, because you know the impact of the work that you are doing. You know the impact of the work that the men and women of the JCF and everybody who is coming together to make this happen, the impact that you are going to make in the lives of so many women who you will come in contact with. And so it's only appropriate that I thank you for what you shared, but I also thank you for what you are about to do, folks. You heard her speak about the domestic violence intervention centers, and it's no small feat to move from 4 to 10. And so we have to big up the work of the Spotlight Initiative in moving the needle from 4 to 10. And in this small corner, we know about those domestic violence intervention centers, but the word must get out there. Everybody who needs these centers, they need to be told that they exist and how to get to them. This video is going to do just that.
You really hit you hard this time. I tried fighting back, but that only made him angrier. Bruises are much worse. You have to report him. Yeah, but if I go to the police station, they're just going to see it as another man and woman fighting. They're going to blow me off.
No, that's not the case. Victims of domestic abuse can get help through the Domestic Violence Intervention Centers. These centers are located at different police stations across the island with specially trained officers in a confidential environment. Although it is located at the police station, it is set apart by itself. Nobody knows to know. Let me show you how to find one of these centers. Open the browser on your smartphone and type in jcf.gov.jm. When the page loads, scroll down to Resources and click on Domestic Violence Intervention Centers. This will give you a full listing of all the centers with their contact information.
So I can use this to find the Domestic Violence Intervention Center nearest me?
Yes, and when you do, you can call them for help, or just walk into any police station and ask them to direct you to the nearest Domestic Violence Intervention Center where you can speak to a police officer.
There is help. Let us help you today. Reach out to one of our domestic violence intervention centers before it's too late.
A message from the European Union United Nations Spotlight Initiative in partnership with the government of Jamaica.
Absolutely fantastic. It is the kind of help that is needed. 10 of them across the island. And folks, there are 2 ways for you to get the help at those domestic violence intervention centers. One, you go to the JCF's website, which is jcf.gov.jm. There's a special link there that you can click on to find the center that's nearest you if you need the help. Also, you can walk to any police station, drive to any police station and declare that you want to be directed to the closest domestic violence intervention center, and they will point you where you need to go so that you can get the help. I look forward to the day that we actually don't need them, because people recognize that relationships are not a boxing match, and the dignity of a woman is that you don't put your hands on her. But in the interim, when women do in fact need that support in such a meaningful way, I'm so thankful that there are these centers island-wide. I say congratulations coming all around. I'm actually monitoring a couple of the pages. I say hand clapping happening, and rightly so, happening right here on Zoom. I say hand clapping also happening on Twitter with the hashtags. Let's keep the conversation and the celebration going. And if you know somebody who needs that intervention, who is struggling in silence, if you feel like you are not equipped to be able to stand in the gap, slip them a note, whisper in their ear, have a one-off conversation in a bathroom, and let them know that the 10 centers are available island-wide to support them. We can't have this kind of conversation about women who have gone through domestic abuse. And the policymakers talk, and the police talk, and the NGOs who mean well talk, and not hear from a woman who has lived it. It takes a lot of bravery. It takes a lot of shedding what people say and what people may think to own your power, to reclaim your power and stand in it and speak. And I want us to make welcome a lady who has lived it, and a lady who has lived through it. And she's gonna share with us. Please make welcome Melanie Black Campbell.
Hi.
Hi, Miss Mel.
Good evening. Good
How
evening,
you do?
everyone. I'm fine, thank you. I'm so blessed. I'm blessed. That has been so good. Well, I've been I've get help from Miss March, Avery March, which she was with the BJA, and from Miss March, I've met Miss Joyce Hewitt from the Woman Inc. And Miss Joyce has been like a mother to me. She has, nurtured me so much, where I feel so empowered. I've been through such an abuse with my husband, and even my kids, them, go through the abuse, but that has been good. And I can't complain. The abuse was so, go ahead.
No, you go.
Well, God has been so good to me, as I said, and Miss Joyce, she has been there even when the COVID time come up, when I couldn't even find, because I'm a hairdresser, and I couldn't even find work. Work wasn't coming in at that time. So Miss Joyce, she has looked out for me. I could get some food. My daughter, wanted a tablet to how bad it was, and she hooked up a little link for me. I could get a tablet for my daughter in school. But abuse has never been good for anybody at all. And it's like a new start over in life for anyone. And it's good to take a start over because, all right, I was in my situation and I didn't think that I want to leave because, my kids, them have everything they need. Them have food, them have everything, you understand? But it's good to start over. I'm actually looking back, I am much better than before. So I would tell anybody today, make a step, try. And at NIS, I get help with Miss March. She has helped me to get into the NIS at that time with a Mr. Edwards, where, I get counseling because I reached at the point where I wanted to kill myself. That's how bad my abuse was. You understand? And even the kids, them go through the same abuse. Remember, as women, we think that, we would want our family life to be good, because some of us, I didn't grow with a mother or father. And I think that I would want my kids them to have that. You know what I mean? And I have to look back at my.
Now, a couple of people having internet challenges. It seems that Mel is as well. Do I still have you, Mel? We're going to try and sort that one out. But two things in particular really stood out to me as she shared. And Mel, anytime you're hearing my voice, I want you to just chip back in so I know that you're there. But one, Mel made mention of the fact that she wasn't going to leave her situation because she thought about her children, and she thought that that would have been the best environment for them, especially as a person who didn't grow up in that kind of environment where there was mother and father around. She felt like, irrespective of the abuse, I must stay in this house and I must take what is going on, because staying in this house and having mother and father and food and shelter is better for my children. And she actually was sacrificing herself in her mind at the expense of that nuclear family that she thought that her children needed. And when she sought help, they made her understand that she's worth it too. That she's worth it too. The other thing that she said that was very important is we have a culture of dismissing the value of counseling. And the inspector made mention of the fact that when you go to the centers, counseling is available. And Mel made mention of the fact that she got to a point where she didn't think her life was worth it anymore, and it was counseling that brought her back. Let's get to a place where we normalize counseling. And counseling isn't necessarily what you see on TV and lying on a couch and talking to somebody and associating it with crazy. Counseling is real life people with real life issues talking to somebody who can help, and sometimes just unburdening. Sometimes just getting off your chest and talking about the things that are burdening you. And so I really love the fact that these 10 centers are available around the country that are going to be able to offer that counseling free of cost, as well as those other agencies that are around, the work that's being done by the various ministries, entities like Woman Inc., that's there with the shoulder to support our young women and our children as they try to reclaim their power as is necessary. Do I have Mel back?
Yes, I'm back.
I'm glad that you are back. I want you to tell me a little bit about this notion that you had in your mind that it was better to stay in the house than get out, because you felt like keeping your children in the house with mommy and daddy was better than getting out. Why?
Because, as I said, I didn't grow with a mother nor a father. I was growing with my grandaunt. You understand? So I think that, my two kids, them, I want to grow them, you know what I mean? With a mother and father. And it never worth it. Because at the end of the day, it's like, I want to fix that relationship. I can't fix it. You understand me? We can't fix nobody at all. We just have to fix we and move on. I can tell you a story, Petria and everyone. I remember one day when I moved out of that house, after counseling and everything, and I moved out of the house, I asked my daughter, what do you remember about us living with your father? She said, Mommy, all I can remember is you and daddy fighting. And sometimes, she right now she's 16 and her brother is 24. And sometimes them have little issues. Even, listen, we think that, as I said, we think that it is good for us, but our kids, it's not good for them. Because we feel like, at the end of the day, they always fight and war. You understand me? It's like the abuse that we go through, the kids them go through it also. So it's like, nobody say you're going to fix it because you have the money, you have a good household, and we have everything. But the kids them is feeling the pain and the pressure and the hurt through all of it. And it comes up with them if they don't get counseling also. So, I thank God so much for BGA and the counselor at NIS, and thank God for Miss Joyce Hewitt. They've been so much a strong tower to me with God.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about the counseling, because Jamaican people say sometimes, them say counseling, mad people go counselor. We have those kinds of things in our minds, and counseling is for rich people. Normal people no go counselor. Tell me your feelings around counseling.
Well, I think counseling is very good because at the point of time when I get counseling, I thought that I would kill myself. I reached the point where, you know, things was bothering me so much. My stress out is like, my husband used to tell me, it's like if I have a cup right here with water. You say, you see cup this with water, I feel like I'm mad. I feel like I'm going to kill myself, right? And when I went to the counselor, now, Mr. Edward, he asked me, he said, how do you think? It's not now counseling like him have me not been whatever, but it's like him said to me, sir, Mel, how do you see yourself? What you think you can do to make yourself better? And him tell me, sir, to get a pen and a paper. And I look back at my life and I say, you know what? The best thing to make this be better, I'm gonna move out of this house and get my children them counseling and get myself sorted out, and that's it. Counseling is so good for us. Very good. Very good.
And I want everybody who is listening to know that that counseling is available free of cost at all 10 of the domestic violence intervention centers. You hear Inspector say it is I care. Domestic violence, I care. It's not something for those out there to look on. It is something that she and other members of the JCF they've taken on as a personal mission. 24-hour manned those centers are. So if you go there to a police station, they can direct you. If not, there are phones that are manned 24 hours. There will always be somebody there to care, to take your call, to point you in direction, to get you the help that you need, because the JCF says, I care. Mel, I thank you for being so brave.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to show my face, you know, I didn't want to hide because I'm not ashamed. I'm not afraid because it's not just me. We have good people because I'm a hairdresser and I have customer that comes in and, you know, I have to encourage them. Listen, man, life may stop right here. So we have to move on. And I tell you, abuse make me feel so bad. I wonder if I hope the next person coming in my life, him can't abuse me. I promise you that. Because I know what I want. I see a vision of real life. You understand me? And that's good. So ladies, please don't think you're gonna fix a man. You fix you. And then the rest go on with the help of God. Thank you so much for having me.
You fix you and the rest go on. Mel is teaching us how to reclaim our power. Big up yourself, Melanie Black Campbell. I'm gonna open the floor for just a few more questions. I see a couple more and I know that we're down to the wire, but I will not let this evening end without sharing some of the comments I'm seeing on social media and actually putting some of the questions on the table. I'm seeing big ups all around for the initiative, for Mel's bravery, for the work that's happening to change the legislation. I'm seeing big ups all around. Let me ask this question, not sure who can take it. And this question's around stalking and what's changing in this legislation to make stalking, to deal with stalking. I don't know who can take that one. I don't know if a member of the JCF or one of the attorneys online can speak to that one. Are there laws to deal with stalking? That's a question from Kerry.
I can jump in.
Sure, please do.
And I'm sure someone else from, you know, one of the state entities might want to respond as well. But just to say that the current framing of the Domestic Violence Act does cover quite a bit of what it refers to as molesting behavior. So it can prevent somebody from entering or remaining in a particular place, from watching a house, watching a school premises or workplace premises, from following or waylaying. I see Inspector nodding, so she's quite familiar, of course, with the language of the law. So there's quite a bit. You won't see the term stalking, but there's quite a bit covered. And of course, when this law was last before the Joint Select Committee of Parliament, when they were looking at broad issues to do with domestic violence, they highlighted a couple of a slightly wider definition that we find in other laws that include other types of controlling or threatening behavior. So the law currently does address some of what we term stalking. Cyber stalking, of course, would be one of those things that we would want to include in an updated law. But there's quite a bit of behavior that can now be addressed with the law as it currently is.
Clear. I see you nodding away, Inspector Dillon. You want to add?
No, I don't think I have anything else to add. Ms. Chambers eloquently spoke about that. But the Cyber Crimes Act also covers cyber stalking because a number of incidents now are being done using technology. And that is why even under the Domestic Violence Act, the court is important. And it rests a lot of onus on places a lot of onus on the victim to ensure that they get protection order for all of these things and/or occupation order. And that would stipulate what it is that an abuser is allowed to do under those orders, because only after those orders are broken that the police actually can arrest persons. But coupled with other laws, yes, action can be taken.
Understood. This one I'm sure you can take as well, Inspector Dillon. Someone's asking, do the male police who work at these intervention centers, do they receive special training and guidance to be able to help the female survivors of domestic violence? That one's coming from Judith.
All right, so the domestic violence intervention centers are staffed with both male and female. So at any given time that you visit a center, you'll find a man and a woman. The male counterpart are not trained any differently from the women. And that is why the persons who we place there are specially selected. They possess a certain skill set. So for many of them, they are counselors, trained counselors. They are trained social workers. So they have that kind of background. And so the persons who we select overall have to have a certain level of skill set. And like I said, the whole business about empathy is critical to all of that. So yes, they go through a period of training. All center managers go through a period of training and development.
Absolutely fantastic. I also see you sharing your number. Boy, you sure you want to do that?
No, that's a number that is public for anybody who have issues around domestic violence. Call me. I will either deal with it or I direct you to a center. But once you call my number, you will get an answer.
Absolutely fantastic. That number, folks, it's 876-2244-274. That's 876-2244-274. Let me see if I can take just two more questions if anybody else has any there. But also to remind folks that there's lots of information that was shared today. In addition to that number, there are the hotlines that are there from the ministry. The female help hotline is 876-553-0372. There's also a male helpline, and that number is 876-553-0387. Can't leave off how you actually can get help at the domestic violence centers. There are two ways that we learned in that awesome PSA. Way number one is actually to go to the JCF website. That's, let me make sure I get it right. It's jcf.gov.jm. Click on the link and you'll actually see where the centers are there. Or if you're in a rush, if you're getting out and you're getting out now and you can't look, go to the nearest police station and tell them, where is the closest domestic violence center? I need to get there. And they'll point you in the right direction. Let's see. Jillian says the inspector's number is on the list at the jcf.gov.jm website. When you click resources and you go to the domestic violence intervention center, so she's accessible. And if she can't help herself right there in the moment, she'll actually point you in the right direction. I think that's the point at which we're going to have to say a big thank you to everybody who participated today. I've been making notes as we went along, and there's so many things that stand out to me. The first thing that I have to speak about is just how shocking the statistics are. Some of those numbers that were shared should actually hit us hard in our bellies. That's what must hit. The shock of the statistics of how many people actually are still today experiencing domestic violence right here in our country under our very noses, and it should jolt us into action. There is change that is happening, that has happened, certainly in the legislation. There is a lot more that needs to be done, and I welcome the suggestions that were put on the table today and that they don't fall on deaf ears. We had 2 legislators today on the panel, and I'm hoping that they will motion whatever tables are required to be able to get those changes made. We need to create safer spaces for our women and our girls. And I'm not just talking about shelters, I'm talking about communities. I'm talking about not cocking your ears to the window and listening to a woman get beat, but open your door and save her from that. I'm talking about somebody deciding to open their cars and be that transportation to the domestic violence centers, 10 of them across the country. Be a brother's keeper, be a sister's keeper, because reclaiming your power is also going to take the village. There are some women right now who are too weak to reclaim the power themselves. And we have to remind them that the power is theirs, has been theirs, and will always be theirs. And we have to be a part of their power as the village to help get them through this. I want to say a very, very, very big thank you to the Spotlight Initiative for making this happen. A very big thank you. I'm going to go through my guests who are awesome today. I have to say a big thank you to both Minister Grange and Minister Terry Long, who shared with us today. A big, big thank you also to the Principal Director of Gender Affairs in the Ministry of Culture. Thank you so much, Sharon Robinson. I appreciate you. Thanks also to the hardworking members of the Jamaica Constabulary Force, especially the representative here tonight. Thank you, Inspector Dillon. Thank you also to Tanya Chambers, who's been combing through the legislation and put together that very comprehensive list of suggestions of changes that need to be made. We appreciate you, Tanya. Thank you so much. Mel, you're everybody's superhero today. You are everybody's superhero today. I know that both of your children must thank you for standing up for yourself and being that example. And today, to being that example to other women who may be going through that situation and thinking staying home and being quiet is the alternative. Thank you for speaking out. I also have to say thank you to the Spotlight Initiative for the investment that they're making in the Caribbean, in Caribbean women, in changing the legislation. Is not a little bit of money, but the money is going to go a very, very far way. Let's keep the conversation going. It is hashtag, let me make sure I get them, hashtag 16 days, still keep the conversation going. Hashtag Spotlight End Violence. My name is Patria K, and I thank you for sharing this evening with me. There's one thing that I wanted to do as we say bye. We have to take a picture, right? Because this is the age of social media and it never happened if there's no picture. So I want everybody to turn their cameras on and I want everybody to just give a wave. Hey, Mel, we see you. Give a wave so that we can capture that this moment happened. I see everybody waving, absolutely fantastic. And just to let the participants know that they are going to get in their inboxes, Jillian, they're going to get a message after this where they're going to be able to participate in the survey just to give some feedback, you know, on how we spent the last couple of hours. It's been 2 hours well spent. And I hope that this is not the end of the conversation because it must continue outside of this space as we help everybody, especially our women and girls, to reclaim their power. Have a good one.
I'm willing to share anytime. Bye.
Awesome.
Police were called to the scene of another death arising from a domestic
Shot and killed his
dispute.
girlfriend,
24 hours after
the
her
custody this evening after allegedly killing his wife in St. Mary's.
The Spotlight Initiative is a global multi-year partnership between the European Union and the United Nations to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls by 2030.
With a commitment of 500 million euros from the EU, Spotlight represents an unprecedented global effort and the largest of its kind to invest in gender equality and women's empowerment. Spotlight engages men and boys as equal agents of change. Engaging men and boys is a key piece of our efforts.
The objectives of Spotlight in Jamaica are to contribute to the reduction of family violence against women and girls, and to improve access for women and girls to essential, safe, adequate, integrated, gender-responsive services.